Hello and welcome back to On the Soul's Terms podcast. Thanks a lot for joining today. This episode is about the fourth house. And if you haven't done so already, I would go back to the episode before this and listen to a conversation between Melanie Reinhardt and myself, getting into the nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty of this particular house. But yes, it's a deep place, this house, and in some ways, since beginning this tour of the houses, this is really our first threshold crossing, besides the very first one that was crossing the ascendant. And the threshold that we're crossing here is the Imum Coeli, or the IC. It's that line in your astrology chart that just goes straight down. And it goes down and down and down. And where is this line going? You know, the word Imum Coeli, a Latin phrase, it roughly translates to the bottom of the sky. So maybe we can start there with the idea of the bottom of the sky. We think about the sky as this grand expanse above us. We look up to the sky. It's very rare that we would consider the sky as being down, somewhere that we would look down in order to find. And yet that is the Imum Coeli. It's the bottom of the sky. So really, if you follow that line down, you're going down under the earth. So you're actually, in some ways, you know, it is the sky on the other side of the earth when you were born, whereas the MC is the very top of the chart, or the mid-heaven, the middle of the heavens. This is that opposite place. And so we can consider that sky there. I mean, that is what the astrology chart is referring to, what is over on that side. But in some ways, it can be even more powerful just to go down into the earth beneath you, and therefore landing in topics like home, and what home, just this one short word, means to you, your family of origin, your ancestral line, everything that is essentially that initial inheritance from the environment that you were in when you were growing up, and beyond that, really beyond that, into time in the womb, as I discussed with Melanie. And Brian Clark also said that, you know, rather than it being your ancestors all the way back to the very beginning of existence, it's more like 3 generations back, which kind of speaks to that indigenous idea of that we stand in the middle of 7 generations, 3 back and 3 forward. So really spending a little bit of time before we fully enter this house to take in your IC. Melanie has long had this pun about the IC being the I don't see, or I can't see. So there is something there, but we don't necessarily relate to it. And in order to relate to our IC and to our fourth house in general, we do need to go down. We do need to enter that more soulful place inside of ourselves and the interiority of the self. It's not the flashy place. It's not where we're going to get accolades. In fact, oftentimes there's quite a lot to work through down here, so much so that it can be like there's a barrier. This IC itself can be a barrier from entering this world, and we can be enticed and seduced out into the world, the outer world, in order to play out all of our patterns out there. But the invitation of the IC, and therefore the invitation of the fourth, is to do that soul work, or as Hillman called it, soul making. And in some ways, the fourth house is that house of soul making. So yeah, all of the angles are personas in a way. The ascendant is the mask that we wear. The descendant is often how people see us. And the MC, or midheaven, is our face we point to the world. But down here, I've been really pondering this. What is the IC as far as a persona? if all of the cardinal angles are somehow related to persona, what is this persona? And it made me think of like what our role was in the family of origin and what our mask was there. So what was our script in a way? What were we to do down here? So it is a persona in a way, but it's the persona that was maybe bestowed upon us by the family, or the place within the family unit that we felt we could most easily get into or feel into or be. And of course, the fact that we do have our own astrological chart means that we've got this kind of like a secret map to that and some symbols down there that we can really pay some close attention to. So for this house, as we go, I would recommend having a look at the IC and what sign that is. It's often overlooked, and also getting a sense of what is in your fourth house. And if you're a bit more advanced with your astrology, you can look into what is the ruler or the rulers of this fourth house, and that'll give you much information. So yeah, I was thinking about that as I see as another persona, and I was thinking about how I remember James Hillman telling the story in one of the men's groups that he was running back in the day of the journey home for him back to his mother's house. And he'd be however old he is, maybe 50 or 60 years old when he's giving these speeches. And then as he gets to the airport, he drops like 10 years, becomes 40, and then gets in the car, years are dropping away. And then as he's walking up the stairs and about to knock on the door of his house of origin or his family house, he's become that child again. I'm sure we can all relate to that, sort of becoming the child, putting back on those old tattered clothes, in order to fit into what we were expected to be and what we were known to be, and putting all of that back on and essentially regressing back to what it was like to be a child all over again. So these clothes that we put on can be like a regression or a reversion to this earlier self that worked for us then, for whatever reason, but may not be working anymore, or we may have grown out of that and no longer really display those patterns and habits anymore in our everyday life. And yet as soon as we go back to that place, there it is all over again. Sometimes it can be a shock when our IC or our fourth house suddenly comes back up again, like from the basement. Suddenly all of those felt experiences come back and can really swamp us, which again is why, we do that work down here. It's a different kind of work though to do down here. It's much more accessible through our dreams, through stories, through image, through, in some ways, art, and ways of connecting to the emotional landscape more so than the things that happened. It doesn't do us all that much good to just list off a bunch of things that happened back here. But if we can have a list of things that happened and then go into like, well, how did that feel? What is the, so ultimately we're trying to trace into that climate, that emotional climate that is in this house. How do we tap into that climate and really feel that again? Because that's what the fourth house is. There was, for all of us, a sense of something that is hard to necessarily put into words, but a sense of a feeling tone that was around in our family of origin, and that'll be different for all of us depending on what kind of experiences that we had. But one thing that we know is it's kind of like in Greek mythology, there's the goddess Mnemosyne, who's the mother of the muses, whose name means cellular memory. And we know that she's lurking down here in the fourth, and her memories, the memories that are still very much embodied and embedded in the body, embedded in our, especially in our emotional body and our feeling body. So yes, maybe taking a moment as we move through the IC as that, maybe it is like a threshold, the IC, and we move, we've been in those first three houses, we've had the sort of almost daimonic first house where we have a personality. We're just sort of going for it. We're just freshly in the world, and so we're just sort of playing up into our persona and more ethereal self in the first, and then that grounds into the second house where we get into the body and we get into the feeling of having an actual, a being down here, a body that is carrying us. And then we enter the third and realize there's others around. And when we come into the fourth, we're gathering up, kind of like the crab, which is a symbol associated with the fourth due to it being a symbol of the moon and Cancer, which is the fourth sign of the zodiac. We're gathering up all of those experiences and attempting to assimilate all of those things that have happened, all of those things that form us, and then take that into like, well, who am I? That's the question down here, actually. Who am I really? Who am I, not just as far as the family that I've come from, but also the land that I was born into and the moment that I was born out of. And essentially that's one way to speak to what astrology is. It names the moment that you were born, and it says, as you came into being, so the sky looked like this, basically. As you came into being, as in were born, the sky looked this way. And there's a significance in the relationship between the sky at that time, which represents the energy of that moment, and you who are born into that into that energy. I just said born into that enemy, which was an interesting slip. I wonder if I'll leave that in there, maybe. But anyway, born into that energetic matrix. With the fourth, in a sense, we're less looking up and more looking down, right? We're looking down into the land. What was the land's dreaming? And this is very much an indigenous way of looking at the world. What was the land dreaming at the moment that you were born? And as astrologers, we can be so caught on the Uranian side of things, the heavens, that we can forget the Gaia side of things, the earth. And, as per all forms of indigenous wisdom, the earth has its own dreaming, and you were born at a particular place. You weren't just born anywhere, but you were born into a particular place, and that place had a particular story that it was telling at the moment that you came into being. So that as well, of like, what is the dream of your land? And it may be under layers and layers of concrete and adaptation to modern life, but still down there underneath it all, if we break through all that concrete and we get to the dirt, and we get to the bones of the matter, we can feel into, what was the dream of that moment? Where were you born in history as well? What was that moment in history in the place that you were born? And that'll give us a few more clues as to what is going on down here in this fourth. So yeah, speaking of that, so we make our adaptations down here to that atmosphere, and and we have created a persona in response to the field. We found ways to be safe, and maybe we've failed at finding ways to be safe as well. And all of that will be down here because, ultimately when our chips are down and when nothing else is really working for us, or when things are sort of falling apart in our lives, we will come back here to this house. We will come back to start again, because this is essentially the place of birth and rebirth and death. Even though all those themes are generally considered to be eighth house themes, we can also feel all of those themes coming through all of the watery houses, because the watery houses, the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th, are places, as Brian Clark said when we were walking through the houses, he named it, that these are the places of endings and therefore the places of beginnings. So something's ending here and something's beginning here. Maybe we return here to have our deaths and our rebirths, to start again and to gather ourselves. What else is going on down here? The ancestors. So, think about that. What sacrifices have your ancestors made in order to bring you into existence? What legacies are around for them that they have worked through and maybe spared you of, or maybe not worked through and therefore given over to you? That could be found down here too. There may be the family myths, the patterns of the family unit, the unresolved legacies. And it's in this place, not the first house, but this place in the fourth house, that we're given a name by one of our parents or both of our parents. And we're given a bloodline. And we're given, as I said, that connection to the land of which we came from. If you think about your passport, that passport is a fourth house thing. It's like, this is my belonging. My belonging is to this land and to these people. And this is the time that I was born. And here's the numbers that reflect that. So yes, this big question down here in the fourth, and I'll take a moment with this, is the question of where do I belong? Where do I belong? Where is my belonging? And that longing inside of belonging can lead us deeper into this house, because I think we all have that longing to be safe and secure. We all have that longing to be around loved ones. We all have that longing to be with Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, the eternal flame at the center of the house, that we can warm ourselves and come back to ourselves and be nourished and nurtured there. We can eat the food that is our food from our people, and that can connect to our real sense of nourishment. And of course, that's often can be what's missing down here as well. So especially if it's missing, we may have an even deeper longing to find our place where we belong. So it becomes a question, in essence, of homecoming, which brings us in a sense to the mythic figure of Odysseus and how he just keeps getting turned around and around. He's just trying to get back to Penelope, his wife, and Telemachus, his son. He's just trying to get back to his people and his place. And coming back from war, coming back from the grand adventure of the Trojan War and everything that had happened there, and being the great hero that he is, he's receiving help from some gods, but he's also receiving a lot of hindrance from other gods, and he's being turned around. And that can be how it feels in a way. I think that's why the Odyssey is such an enduring classic, because it speaks to some kind of a journey of the soul, this longing to come back home, this idea, in a sense, that we've gone far from home, and we want to know what it's like to return. We want to know if it's even possible to return. And there's a lot of moments in Odysseus's journey when he is out to sea, and he is at a loss, and he is staring into the ocean, and he is lamenting his fate, and he is in that sense of wondering if he'll ever make it, and what it might mean for him if he doesn't make it, what that would actually mean for his lineage and his legacy and his home and his wife and everybody that he loves and that loves him, that's waiting for him. And then on the other side, we have Penelope's story, who's weaving and unweaving, just trying to buy time for Odysseus. So she weaves her tapestry, her beautiful tapestry, by day, and unweaves it by night in order to keep the suitors at bay. So both of those things, in a way of, one part of us is like Penelope, weaving and unweaving this tapestry, just to help remind the Odysseus in us who's out on the journey that there is a home, there is a place to come back to. And then we also have that Odysseus who's trying with all of his heart and all of his soul to get back home, but it's proving more and more difficult the further and further he goes. So I'd like to switch now into one of the great conversations about the fourth house. Is we generally think of the parental axis as the fourth house and the 10th house in astrology. And it was in the 20th century that Liz Green, the astrologer Liz Green, famously, brought a lot of conjecture from the experience that she was having with her clients. She was finding more and more that the fourth house was much more related to the father than it was to the mother, even though you would sort of assume, in a way, that the fourth house would be mother because it's the fourth sign. That's Cancer. Cancer is the moon, and all of these symbols link together to become mother. But in actual lived experience, and this is the great thing about astrology, is that it is a phenomenological form of research. So we have to take in the actual experiences of our clients and weave that back through the chart in order to gather up through the phenomenological research that we're actually doing as astrologers to make sure that our craft is able to adapt and adjust and transform and progress over the course of a lifetime, and take in other astrologers' experiences of what they have discovered, because we can't see everybody and we can't know it all. So in that phenomenological research mode, Liz Green really found that the father was much more associated with the fourth, and her she made some strong statements about that. And then Howard Sesportaz, who was her colleague before he passed away, and one of the authors or speakers of those great books, The Luminaries and The Inner Planets, and this book that I'm referring to here, the Houses, or the 12 Houses, he has a more nuanced perspective of encouraging us to not really land on whether the fourth house is the mother or the father, but leave sort of an opening for that, and having that as a sense of like, what do your clients say, and what do they say about their parent, and then you should be able to locate mother in one house and father in the other. So Sportis goes on to say that the 10th house would be like the parent that shapes you and prepares you for the world and socializes you. So the one that has most influence on you. And then the 4th house parent would be the hidden or less visible parent, or the parent that's, not so obvious and evident. And so that is a really good way, maybe as you're listening, to get a sense of, well, which parent would fit where for you. And so it really becomes very context driven. But I can really see an argument for both very, very clearly here. And in my own experience, just to speak to my own chart, I really see my father down there in the 4th and my mother in the 10th. So when we do spend time reflecting on it with this idea that Howard gives us to give a bit of space to it, I feel like it will land in a way. But the other thing that we might think about is it not also, is the 4th house somehow related to the dynamic between mother and father? So that could be another angle to think from here, is that their relationship itself and the dynamic that they created with each other, because would that not also make a huge influence on the psychic field in which you were growing up? The relationship of the parents is kind of like, sometimes I think a lot of the myths actually relate to this very exploration of the energy going back and forth between the parents. Now, did they create a loving and safe environment, or was it maybe violent, or what kind of environment was created there? And then maybe we have one parent, maybe we have two parents that are estranged. Maybe we live with the father, maybe we live with the mother, maybe we switch that up. But either way, it's like the tension between our caregivers, or the harmony between them, to me feels like a big component of what we're exploring down here in the 4th. So I'm thinking that we might move into a little bit of mythic terrain. One myth that really speaks to the 4th house for me is the story of the Minotaur in the labyrinth, because oftentimes there is something down here that people are not talking about and not speaking about, and it's like there can be pacts within the family unit that make sure that whatever is down here doesn't get spoken, so it doesn't come up. And that's very much the story of the labyrinth, because there was a shameful moment that happened. Really started with Minos, who was given, who wanted power, and therefore asked the gods, asked Poseidon to send forth some kind of a symbol that would show the people that he should be the king. And Poseidon agreed to this and sent forth this beautiful white bull straight out of the ocean. And then everybody was very mightily impressed with that and said, yes, this is clearly the king. And then Poseidon turns to Minos and says, okay, I've given you what you wanted, now give me what I want, which is to sacrifice that bull. And sacrifice, remember, is the word to make sacred that bull and send it back to me, essentially. And Minos couldn't do it. he sort of tried to fool Poseidon by sacrificing one of his lesser bulls, which of course did not work. Now that made Poseidon mightily angry, which led to him making Pasiphae, who's the wife of Minos, enraptured with this white bull, that very same bull. That led to a series of events in which Pasiphae, the wife of Minos, gives birth to the Minotaur or the Minotaur. And the shame of this act, this bestial act between the white bull and the wife, was so shameful within the family unit, so despicable and disgusting that nobody wanted to talk about it. And so Minos asked Daedalus, or really told Daedalus, the master craftsman, to create a labyrinth in which they could hide this Minotaur. And then every 9 years, they would sacrifice 9 youths and 9 maidens to that Minotaur. And this is a very dramatic and over-the-top way of describing family complexes, that the innocence is getting sacrificed on the altar of shame, on the altar of the thing that isn't to be talked about. And so in this story, there's two characters that really come along. Theseus is the one who wants to enter the labyrinth and defeat the Minotaur. So we know that there's some kind of heroic part to play here, or the ability or the willingness to go in to these places. And that really is a soulful act, the willingness to go into where the drama is and into where the trouble is in the family unit. And then Ariadne, who sees that he's going to be killed in there, and if he's not killed, he'll be lost in there forever, therefore gives Theseus the thread, the red thread in which he can go through the labyrinth and come back out and ultimately help us to return and help us to map the labyrinth. And so that thread is really important too. It's the softest thing in the kingdom. You can hold it between your fingers and you can feel, as long as I've got this thread, and there's nothing really that can harm me, whilst looking through this deep place in the chart and trying to retrieve what has been lost, which ultimately is symbolized by the shame monster that is the Minotaur. It's symbolized by that beast with the bull head and the human body, the willingness to confront whatever is there and ultimately transform that one into material that can be very, very useful for the rest of your life. Because if we are able to go deep into the labyrinth with the help of the thread and the heroicism of Theseus, then we can go face to face with that monster and we can relieve ourselves of extraordinary amounts of energy. I mean, just think of how much energy the kingdom, Minos's kingdom, how much energy is being put towards the holding down of the monster. So much energy is there that is going towards that. And by coming face to face and integrating that monstrous side, it means that all of that energy that we've been using to repress it suddenly is freed up for us to use and for us to have our all of our energy online again. So that's the benefit of actually going in and facing the monster, facing what's been exiled, and facing these old patterns of repetition that have been going round and round in our family units. So yes, it's a big, dramatic, over-the-top story, but I find it to be a very, very useful story for mapping psyche, and especially for mapping the inner terrain of the fourth house, where we do need to go in and see what's really going on in here. Where are the secrets? What's hiding in these places of the soul? And on another note, that labyrinth that I'm referring to, back at Epidaurus, which is where I was a month ago, enjoying the dream chambers. Opposite the Abaton, which is the dream chamber, there is actually a labyrinth. So I wonder if that story of the Minotaur and the labyrinth was, a part of the healing that went on in the dream chamber. So one would go through the labyrinth, round and round that you go, sort of like dizzying yourself out of your everyday consciousness before entering the ceremony that would lead you to sleeping in the Abaton. And all of that feels like very fourth house to me. Even the Abaton itself feels like we're sort of following the IC and we're going down and we're being down there with the ancestors, and we're slowing ourselves right down, our whole nervous system and the whole thing. We're slowing ourselves down to that still point. And in that still point, we allow these old things to surface. Maybe we meet Hades down there and all the graves and the burial sites, and we meet all the bones and the dismembered parts, and we slowly but surely find our way to remember by slowing all the way down into that space of recollection, of renewal, and of really finding ourselves at this deepest level again. So yes, that feels like a good place to have us rest, in a sense. This is a place of the unseen. This is a place of the unspoken, and this is a place of the unconscious. And it's our, well, in some ways, it's a choice that we have, is to enter this place and really come in contact with our deepest root system. And if we think about the fourth and the IC, that's the roots. And then when we come to the 10th and the MC, that's the reach, right? That's where we really come out. That's where everything can blossom out into the 10th. But without a firm foundation in the fourth, it's hard to keep things in the 10th, which is our career and our calling and our place in the world. It's hard to keep that it really stable. It's like a tree that doesn't have any roots. So this is where we get our nourishment, down here in the fourth, and then we can reach up like that tree up into the 10th. And so I guess the questions are, that linger here in the fourth house, that linger here with the IC. Can we honor the child self? We all have that inner child. Can we honor the child self without collapsing into it, without giving it over the reins, without having it in the driver's seat, but visit it as the adults that we are, and make connection and retrieve that child from whatever state he or she is in. What happens, or what can happen, when we go to this place and meet it with reverence, like we're heading into the adaptation, like we're really connecting and taking our time here, when we meet it with reverence, not shame, or meet the shame with reverence, we might say. And then finally, one thing Brian said really stuck with me in our conversation through the houses when we were in the fourth. He said the great loss and the great tragedy of this house, of the fourth house, is that we can't stay here. That we can't stay here. We know we must go, and we know we must head off. But it is a place of return, not to stay, but to remember. And then when we do head off, where are we going? Well, just like Ariadne, she ends up leaving her family, leaving Minos, and heading off with her great love, though short-lived, Theseus, and the two of them head off to Naxos, where, well, tragically, she's abandoned by Theseus, but then she finds her way into the middle of the island, and she ends up getting together and finding her place with Dionysus. So in a way, when we head away from this fourth, we head into the fifth, and that is the house of play. It is the house of individuation. It is the house of creativity. And it's in the fifth, when we have all the momentum from these first four signs that we've gone through, but particularly from this real root system of the fourth, that we find the very seeds and the very first elements and components of who we are and who we're meant to be. And we begin that arduous journey of individuation. We'll begin it in the fifth, and we will be beginning that in Leo season coming soon. But I believe, my staff tell me, that's just me, I'm the staff, that we have a fairy tale coming next week. So stay tuned for that as well. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.